You're watching WVTM 13 News.
We are on the eve of what has been called the most important election in a lifetime, all of it happening during a pandemic. And while hundreds of thousands of Alabamians requested absentee ballots, hundreds of thousands more plan to vote tomorrow and head to the polls. The polls open now in just over 12 hours. In tonight's WVTM 13 Commitment 2020 Alabama Votes coverage, we've got answers to your questions to help put your mind at ease and clear up any confusion you may have before you go to the polls tomorrow. As many of you are planning to head to the polls Tuesday, a reminder, they are scheduled to open at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. They will be open for 12 hours. So overall, what are we looking at in terms of voter turnout? I checked the numbers for the last presidential election in 2016. According to the Secretary of State's office, more than 2.1 million people cast their ballots. That means voter turnout was just below 67%. This year, with such a big absentee ballot push, will we see similar numbers overall? Or are we looking at potential records? I asked Secretary of State John Merrill, he oversees our elections, what he expects to see tomorrow.
Now, as far as overall turnout is concerned, we expect that we're going to have somewhere between 68 and 75% of our voters go to the polls on election day or have participated through the absentee process, and that will be between 2.5 and 2.8 million people voting on November 3rd.
Again, a couple of things to keep in mind. Those polls open at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. They close at 7 p.m. We've had some questions about whether you can vote if you're in line and those polls close at 7. So if you're in line before 7 o'clock and you're a qualified voter, you will be able to cast your ballot. Here in our state, keep in mind if you have tested positive for COVID-19, you cannot go to the polls. This applies to anyone who was diagnosed last Thursday through tomorrow. However, you can still cast an emergency absentee ballot. A special form has to be filled out by a doctor. That ballot has to be completed, has to be returned to the absentee election manager no later than noon tomorrow. And if you do make it to the polls, locations across central Alabama are working to keep voters safe amid the coronavirus pandemic. You can see right here some of the sanitizing that's going into effect. Jefferson County hired a company to disinfect all the polling places. A team of Cintas techs are prepping polling places using disinfecting mist and microfiber towels. The mist is in a backpack sprayer, and they're touching all the key touch points, the tables, the chairs, the doorknobs, even the floors are going to be disinfected. The county is spending $325,000 in CARES Act cash to sanitize 170 plus polling places, both before and after those last votes are cast.
That should give all the voters that are going to be going to the polls on tomorrow heightened sense of security that you should be in good hands.
Cintas says they have given poll workers commercial-grade disinfectants that they can use to spray down those voting surfaces all throughout the day tomorrow. Election officials say a similar strategy worked well during the July 14th Senate runoff and also during city elections back in August. And tomorrow there are still a number of people who will choose to vote in person. There was a news conference earlier today, and the Jefferson County Health Department suggested anyone who shows up to vote but feels uncomfortable in large crowds can leave and then return to vote at a different time on Tuesday. Officials say they are not expecting as large of a crowd at some locations starting around 10 o'clock in the morning.
Bring a pen, like a black ink pen, so you don't have to share one with someone else, and potentially a stylus. So if you're having an electronic device that you're going to use to vote, have your own in hand so you don't have to share with someone else.
Some good advice there. As a reminder, local health experts say wearing a mask is required whether you're inside or outside of your polling location. And here's some things to keep in mind to stay safe when you are voting tomorrow. The CDC safety tips include wearing a mask, social distancing, and also washing your hands. They also recommend bringing your own supplies. So you heard the mention of bringing pens or a stylus, tissues, also hand sanitizer, and also try to limit your time at the polls. So before you vote, take a look at those sample ballots. They're online right now. You can fill those out, and that decreases delays and also decreases crowding at the polls. So what do you need to take with you tomorrow? Well, here in our state, you have to show a photo ID to confirm your identity when you vote in person. If you don't have an approved form of photo ID, you can vote with a regular ballot if you were positively identified by 2 election officials. There's also a signed affidavit that's required in that situation. A couple other things to keep in mind. Under Alabama law, it's a Class A misdemeanor for a person to reveal or take a photo of another voter's ballot. However, you can photograph your own ballot and you can post that on the internet. As for Election Day attire, the Secretary of State's office says that voters in Alabama are able to wear campaign buttons or t-shirts into polling places, but those doing so should not loiter and should not leave any campaign material behind. So it's just a few hours, a little over 12 hours away from Election Day. Do you have a way to get to the polls? If the answer is no, you're not alone. One estimate says 15 million people couldn't vote in the last presidential election because they couldn't find a way to get to the polls. WVTM 13's Jeff Eliasoff looks at some of the help that's available tomorrow.
One ride-sharing company says in 2016, 14% of eligible voters said transportation was a barrier to voting. So let's start with the popular ride services. Lyft will offer 50% off rides to the polls or a drop box when you enter the code 2020VOTE. And depending on where you live, the ride may even be free. Uber has the same deal, up to a $14 discount per round trip. Hertz Rent-A-Car says if you rent for 2 days over the Election Day period, they'll give you one of those days free. Max Bus Service has no special plans for Election Day, but they will run a regular, not a holiday schedule. I called both the Democratic and Republican Party leadership across the state of Alabama. They tell me that while they're not taking anyone directly to the polls, anyone who needs help should call their offices. As in past years, the Alabama NAACP is providing rides. Anyone who needs a lift to the polls, either voting early or on Election Day, may call 256-444-1300 to arrange a ride. Van space will be limited to 3 passengers at a time because of COVID, but they'll make as many trips as necessary to get everyone there. We hope nothing stands in your way this time. Jeff Eliasoff, WVTM 13.
I do have a reminder about how much time you can take from work to vote. According to the Secretary of State's office, employers can give you up to 1 hour to go and vote. Now, keep in mind, your boss can tell you what time you can go vote, and if your shift starts 2 hours after polls open or ends the hour before polls close, that time off may not be granted. Well, voting's a little bit easier for city employees this election year because Birmingham City Council voted last week to make every presidential election a city holiday. Officials say the pandemic and long lines for in-person voting impacted that decision. Council President William Parker says that decision is going to take effect for Tuesday's election.
We truly want everyone to have the opportunity to express their voice and participate in the democratic process.
While emergency departments like the police department, fire, and 911 will be staffed, other city offices will be closed tomorrow. But like other holidays during this budget-strapped year, this is an unpaid day off, unlike other holidays. Well, keeping our elections secure continues to be a major focus for election leaders. Just last month, U.S. officials shared that Russian hackers have targeted the networks of dozens of state and local governments in the U.S., stealing data from at least 2 servers. Secretary of State Merrill says that he is not really concerned about that advisory.
We have attempts on our system each and every day. They always are trying to violate our system, but we've never been penetrated. We've never had a situation where our situation would have resulted in a breach that would have disabled us or put us in a vulnerable position. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're continuously prepared to fight back against any of those actions.
Secretary Merrill says he tries to maintain constant contact with Homeland Security, the FBI, CIA, and private partners as well, making sure they're always prepared. We wanted to know how this record-setting absentee voting is going to impact just how fast votes are tabulated tomorrow. Couple things to keep in mind heading into Tuesday. No votes are counted before November 3rd. So if you sent in your absentee ballot back in early September when the process began, your ballot won't be open and counted until tomorrow. Secretary of State Merrill says the ballots have been held in a secure location in each county. And he says that when the ballots are held there, they will be open November 3rd, 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, fed into tabulators throughout the day until all the votes are counted. Well, Secretary Merrill tells me that some counties will also have additional staff on hand. They'll also have additional vote tabulators to help with all those absentee ballots. Absentee ballots returned by mail have to be postmarked no later than today. They have to be to the absentee election manager no later than noon tomorrow. That's Election Day. If they're hand-delivered, the ballot should have been in the office of the absentee election manager by close of business today. The Secretary of State's office tells us that more than 331,000 absentee ballots were requested, and of those, more than 300,000 have already been returned. Secretary Merrill told me earlier this year that they initially expected about 150,000 absentee ballots to be requested overall. And even with the tight turnaround, election leaders have been urging you to double-check that ballot before you return it. If you voted absentee, you probably saw there was a bit of a checklist that you had to go over before putting it in the mail. One of the things you had to do was fill out an affidavit where you check a box about why you were voting absentee. That's because of concerns, or if it's because of concerns over COVID, The Secretary's office says that you're encouraged to select the box that said, "I am physically incapacitated and will not be able to vote in person on Election Day." You also had to make sure it had the required signatures. I asked Secretary Merrill about mistakes and what could cause a vote not to be counted. Here's how he says that's addressed.
There is an absentee voting crew that actually evaluates each absentee ballot as it's submitted to determine its validity. If it has been viewed as a credible ballot, then it's counted along with all the other ballots that are cast.
And now we are just hours away from Election Day 2020. Other than the presidential candidates, who else are you going to see on the ballot tomorrow? First up, Senate, between incumbent Democratic Senator Doug Jones and Republican nominee Tommy Tuberville. If you remember, Tuberville beat out former U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions in the runoff election back in July. On to the House. In District 3, incumbent Republican Representative Mike Rogers is being challenged by Democratic candidate Dr. Adia Winfrey. In District 4, incumbent Republican Representative Robert Aderholt taking on Democratic candidate Rick Neighbors. Republican Representative Gary Palmer running unopposed for House seat in District 6. And in District 7, incumbent Democratic Representative Terry Sewell also running unopposed. Well, we've got you covered. We're your place for election coverage tomorrow. If you haven't done so already, make sure you download the WVTM 13 app for updates throughout the day. Follow us. Our digital coverage starts tomorrow at 7:30. You're going to hear from Secretary of State John Merrill. Expert analysis from Scott Beeson and Mayor Walt Maddox. Also, we'll take you live to polling places all throughout central Alabama. Join us here on air for election night coverage starting tomorrow morning at 4 a.m. You're not just voting on the next president and senator from Alabama tomorrow. You're also going to decide several amendments. So we're going to break those down for you right after this. You're watching WVTM 13 News. Welcome back. This is WVTM 13 Commitment 2020 Alabama Votes. We are going over everything you need to know before heading to the polls tomorrow morning. Alabamians will see 6 amendments to the state constitution on the ballot on Tuesday. We're highlighting each of the possible changes. The amendments will be at the very bottom of your ballot after you vote for everything else. So first up, statewide Amendment 1. This deals with the language in the state constitution describing who has a right to vote. Right now, the Constitution reads that every U.S. citizen, but if the amendment passes, the Constitution will be changed to only U.S. citizens have a right to vote. This would not change the requirement for voting. Amendment 2 covers changes to the state judicial system. Some of those changes include allowing the Alabama Supreme Court to appoint the administrative director of courts. Right now, that is a position appointed only by the Chief Justice. If passed, Amendment 2 would also increase membership on the Judicial Inquiry Commission from 9 members to 11 members. I want to get to Amendment 3 now. This covers judges who are appointed to fill a vacancy. Right now, an appointed judge is allowed to serve 1 year in the office before they have to run for that office. If Amendment 3 passes, appointed judges would be allowed to serve 2 years in office before they would be required to run. Amendment 4 seeks to remove racist language from the state constitution. If this amendment passes, the state legislature would then be allowed to draft a version of the state constitution when they meet in 2022. That draft, removing any racist language, would still have to come back to voters for the approval. Amendments 5 and 6, almost identical, but they deal with different counties in North Alabama. 5 relates to Franklin County, while 6 relates to Lauderdale County. If these pass, the state constitution would have a special stand your ground law. This is for churches in those counties. Again, all 6 amendments will be at the bottom of your ballot when you head to the polls tomorrow morning. And there are 8 Alabama counties that will be deciding countywide amendments as well on Tuesday. WVTM 13's Lisa Crane breaks those down for us.
Ian, voters in Bibb and Walker counties will decide whether to give probate judges who are members of the state bar, in other words attorneys, the same power and authority as a circuit judge. So this would allow some cases to be decided in probate court that would otherwise be transferred up. Proponents say it'll save time and money and lighten the caseload in circuit court. Now, Walker County residents will also decide whether elected and appointed officials, including the sheriff, can participate in the employees' retirement system. In Calhoun County, voters will consider an amendment to make existing charity bingo games legal again. They've been in limbo since voters approved an amendment in 2018 to ban bingo within 1,000 yards of any residence. Now, this pertains to charity bingo in this amendment, and that's charity bingo only. Well, those of you in Fayette County will see a constitutional amendment on the ballot that would raise property taxes by 3 mills. That money would go to the Fayette County Firefighters Association to benefit fire services, both paid and volunteer departments. And a yes vote to the amendment in Pickens County would keep things just the way it is right now. It would mean voters will continue to elect the county school superintendent. The Shelby County amendment has to do with mutual aid. Voters there will decide whether cities and utilities could enter into contracts to help each other out to more quickly restore utility service after a natural disaster or other emergency. In St. Clair County, voters will decide whether to establish school districts. And while this is not a vote on a tax increase, those opposed to this change say it would make it easier for officials to ask for new taxes in the future. There are two amendments on the ballot in Talladega County. The first would ensure a person is not liable for using deadly force in self-defense or while defending another person on church property. Opponents say this is already covered in the state Stand Your Ground law. Amendment 2 in Talladega County would make it illegal to use septage, that's human sewage, like that from a septic tank, to be applied to land as a fertilizer. This one came up because of public outcry over a business near Lincoln that was doing just that.
We've got you covered when it comes to election coverage. If you haven't done so, download the WVTM 13 app. We're going to have updates all throughout the day on Tuesday. And then we hope you can join us here tomorrow night. We're going to be on air for election night coverage. Our coverage starts tomorrow morning, in fact, at 4 o'clock before the polls even open. It's going to go throughout the day. Follow our digital coverage tomorrow night starting at 7:30. Number of folks you're going to hear from: Secretary of State John Merrill. We'll have expert analysis from Scott Beeson and Mayor Walt Maddox. Also take you live to polling places and campaign headquarters all throughout central Alabama. You asked, and we are getting answers, from absentee voting to voting status to straight party voting. Ahead, we're going to break down your pre-election day questions during WVTM 13 Commitment 2020 Alabama Votes. The wait for Election Day is almost over. You may have some questions about voting tomorrow. We know more than 330,000 of you have requested absentee ballots, but now some of you may have decided not to use that ballot. So that poses a question. If I requested an absentee ballot and decided not to use and submit it, can I still vote in person? We reached out to the Secretary of State's office to get some clarification on that one. I'm told that you'll have to vote with a provisional ballot at the polls because you've already been marked as an absentee voter. Another question: if you're considered inactive, can you still vote, or do you have to update your status? Here's the answer here. I checked on that as well, and you can still vote by simply filling out a voter registration update form. You're going to find that at your polling site, but you are encouraged to check your status online. Go to alabamavotes.gov before Election Day. You want to confirm your registration status, your ballot status, polling location, and your address. So this is alabamavotes.gov. This is what the website looks like. You can scroll down to where it says My Voting Information. When you do that, it's going to take you right here. It's going to take you to an area where you can put in your name, your registration information. You can search by name, date of birth, or address, and then say look up to get those results. All the information is right there for you. If tomorrow is your first time voting, or maybe it's been a while, we have a quick refresher about straight party voting. You have that option when you vote here in Alabama. I checked, and in the 2016 presidential race, well over 1 million voters use that option. It means you vote for all the candidates, all the Democratic or Republican candidates on the ballot, just by filling in the bubble right at the top. It says straight party voting. You pick either Democrat or Republican party. So if you want to vote for any candidate that is outside of the party you selected, you can fill in the bubble next to the preferred candidate's name. That means that candidate, not the one associated with your party, gets your vote in that race. What about writing in a candidate? You can still do that as well. You just fill in the bubble where it says write in candidate and then put that person's name next to it. It's always a good idea to get familiar with the ballot before you head out to your polling site. And you can find those online right now. The Secretary of State's website has them county by county. We've got a link for you on the WVTM 13 app. Look for that in the Commitment 2020 section. Thanks so much for being with us tonight for WVTM 13 Commitment 2020 Alabama Votes. Polls open tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. They'll be open for 12 hours until 7 p.m. Even though polling locations are scheduled to close at 7 o'clock tomorrow night, keep in mind, if you are in line by that time, you will still be able to cast your ballot. Hope you can join us tomorrow morning. Our election coverage begins early in the morning at 4 o'clock. We're going to take you live to the polls as they open. At midday, we're going to bring you live updates all throughout the community, and our election night coverage kicks off tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock. We're going to highlight some of the critical races from President to Senate to House and some of the other issues you'll decide on the ballot. And make sure you tap into our digital coverage all throughout the day on the WVTM 13 app. We're going to start streaming at 7:30 tomorrow night. You'll hear from Secretary of State John Merrill, who oversees our elections. Also, expert analysis from Scott Beeson and Mayor Walt Maddox. Our crews will be live at polling sites throughout the night. Some at election night parties as well, getting reaction as those numbers come in. And then, of course, join us back here at 10 o'clock tomorrow for the final preview, or tonight rather, for the final preview before Election Day. And again, we'll see you tomorrow morning starting at 4 a.m.